Today I wanted to tell you about Hymenoptera and the Angiosperm Terrestrial Revolution, which is the term for when flowering plants evolved and then spread across the globe and just became like a global phenomena. They and very soon after, about like that, the Angiosperm Terrestrial Revolution was 125 million years ago during the early Cretaceous period. And Hymenoptera, the group that includes like ants, bees, and wasps, and a couple of other kinds of flying insects, they all evolved from parasitoid wasps, take which all they have very interesting, they're called that because of the way that they rear their young, and they typically are parasitic, and they like inject they lay their eggs inside like a caterpillar, like a wasp will, and then the babies hatch and eat that caterpillar, and then will like they mate that way. That's typical with parasitoid wasps. Hymenoptera, a lot of them, like bees, they specifically evolved, and eusociality evolved in bees and ants, which are both in Hymenoptera, which is, I think that humans are really limited in urban environments. We evolved as a social species, but not as a eusocial one. And like the crowding that happens in major urban environments, like in places like Chicago or New York, it's a different thing. Like we did not evolve for that. We don't have pheromones to be able to communicate things that we need to, like, like we have our traffic, just look at our traffic system. Ants would never have that. Bees would never have that problem. And so like we just did not evolve for this. And so, but basically bees, they evolved just 5 million years after the Angiosperm Terrestrial Revolution in the early Cretaceous. And they evolved 120 million years ago. They, instead of bringing back like an insect for their young, they realized that pollen is a nutritious, protein packed source of nutrition that they could feed their young. And that's how bees originally evolved. They think that it was like wasps who were hunting around the flowers that figured out, instead of feeding their young live prey, they can feed them pollen. And that's how bees ended up evolving. And it spiraled into like eusociality from there. I think that it's just one of the most interesting evolutionary tracks. And Hymenoptera, I am so fascinated by them. And I really have been thinking about getting like a honey ant colony, or like a honeypot ant colony. They're the ones where they have there's a kind of worker that never leaves the colony, that just hangs upside down, and their abdomens swell up to these enormous things. That's why they're called honeypots, full of nectar. So they're like living food banks where they store up food for the rest of the colony, and then they share it whenever there's like a drought or they're like a famine. Like they're able to then survive by feeding off their living food banks. And so like those are specialized workers that live in there as a human, like as a living storage container. And so they never leave the colony their entire lives. I think that that's so cool. I was thinking about getting an ant colony. I've never had an ant colony before. There's some invertebrates that I would actually like to have. Like I have some invertebrates, and like I would like to raise like mantids, for example, or I would even get into like some kind of arachnids. But I've never tried anything in Hymenoptera, and like I would like to have a beehive, but I live in Arizona, and I do not have space for that. I don't have the right yard for that. I cannot have a beehive back here. I have a homeless man who sleeps right behind my wall of my backyard. He sleeps up against it. I can't be having a beehive harass this man. That would be horrible. And then I just don't have many flowers around. Like they would have to, I don't know where they would go. But it's so they evolved about 120 million years ago is when bees first evolved, and Hymenoptera originates way earlier than that, obviously, but bees specifically, they after they obviously needed to wait until flowering plants evolved. But it's crazy to think that for most of Earth's history, like there were no flowers, there were no flowering plants. All fruits are like angiosperms. Fruits are like they have flowers, they get pollinated, then like the petals fall off, and they'll like turn into fruits that like that then contain the seeds. That's how angiosperms reproduce, through like flower pollination, then fruiting and seeds, and then germination, and then they grow the next plant. And so it's a really interesting cycle, and it's just really cool to, I don't know, talk about, think about. I don't know, I like it. But bees to me, and they're just so cute. I love the way that they look. But then flowers, I don't know, like I when I was in Chicago, I took pictures of all the pretty flowers that I saw, even some that were like not pretty. I got some that were like half dead. I mean, I just love flowers. But it's crazy to think of a time like before grass or before trees existed. Like there's a time in Earth's history where there were no trees on land, and instead we had enormous pillars of what they used to classify as a fungus. I think that they now recently discovered that, because they did this like study where they looked at like the structure of these things, and they found that something about the, I don't know if it was the mycorrhizal network or something like that, was not traditionally fungus. And so I don't think that it's considered a fungus anymore, but they were enormous pillars that were that were just pillars of fungus. Like imagine a mushroom without a cap, and it was just like that. And they were all over the place and huge. And so those basically replaced, like took the place of tree. Like those were the original things on land. Then when trees evolved, palms evolved, flowering plants evolved, then it became more familiar. But throughout the Cretaceous period, especially up and like as the Angiosperm Terrestrial revolution is going on, and that will make flowering plants are very familiar to us. So like that made things a lot more familiar. But when we were working with only the more basal, the more like the earliest kinds of plant life that existed on Earth, it's really interesting to think of, like throughout the dinosaurs' time, like forests changed a lot. The kinds of things that made up forests, like the look of forests, changed a lot. And that is such a really interesting idea to me. Like, you know, like the great dying, like the great oxygenation event, like they have biologists have terms for like lots of these events, and like especially extinction events. But I love the ones where it's not an extinction event. It's not like here's this horrible catastrophe that happened. It's like, this is the Angiosperm Terrestrial revolution. Plants are revolutionizing. They have flowers now. They're spreading everywhere. It's going great for them. Like pollen is a great way for them to reproduce. It's, you know, it just, but today it's hard to imagine a world where plants don't work like that, where pollen and flowers are not a part of the, is not a part of like the plant life cycle, or like just the biome that we're used to. It's so foreign, the early Cretaceous period, up until 125 million years ago, when the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants, evolved. And they have, and I love the word stamen. I don't know why. Stem and stamen. I use the word stamen in a lot of my poems. I don't know why, but I love that word. I really do. And bees are just so cute, and then ants are so cool. But then eusociality, I'm so fascinated by. Like, for example, we could use AI actually to help us to compensate for what we lack in terms of like eusociality. Like if we put cameras on the front and back of every car and then gave AI the ability to run all of our cars, like made them all self-driving but all connected to one network, to where AI could like make us control all the cars to where we could be moving at high speeds and be coordinated like a school of fish or a flock of birds flying through the sky. Like they're not crashing into each other because they're all able to like adjust and like, but we humans cannot make that happen. We make driving a death trap. It's one of the most deadly things that we do on a daily basis. And we get into these 1,000-pound vehicles and make them move up to 100 miles an hour. And then we're like just barreling down the road every day. And like we're getting into these things by choice. And like we're putting our lives at risk because we're relying on strangers and human reaction times for our survival anytime you get in a car. And it's crazy to me, but like insects have like pheromones. They have a lot of things that allow them to communicate things that they would need to, like they can lead scent trails to where like they don't need to rely on purely visual cues. They have things like they've evolved biological functions to allow for eusociality that we as a regular non-eusocial species, a regularly social species, not an asocial one, but not eusocial, we do not have them. And so we run into conflict. We, just like the chimps, we have a propensity for war. We're territorial. And I mean, ants are territorial. They compete against other, but like the thing is that we don't even have an internal cohesion. We fight, we have a lot of infighting. And that is where when we're forced into these major urban environments, like we did not evolve for that. We evolved in Africa, like the hominins evolved very differently than Hymenoptera. And the other major, well, I mean, if you don't count naked mole rats, because those are mammals, but termites are the other major example of a eusocial species. But they are actually roaches, not Hymenoptera. And I don't think roaches are part of Hymenoptera, but they're not bees and wasps. Like bees and wasps are like, they're very closely related. They descend from parasitoid wasps, but termites are basically eusocial, highly specialized cockroaches. And when they evolved, there was no going back. I mean, eusociality is just a huge thing. If once it evolves, it never goes away. Like, and it's a game changer, and it's one of my favorite things in biology. I don't know. It really, it gets me going. I like it. And the Angiosperm Terrestrial revolution. If you follow Lindsay, who's a zoologist, and I love her. I've watched all of her videos, but she calls it flower power time. So good. But if you watch her, the Angiosperm Terrestrial evolution is what she refers to as flower power time. I like that word. But there's the Angiosperm Terrestrial revolution. It basically made it possible for bees to evolve, because and it transformed the face of the planet into what we know today. And so it's one of the most significant events in Earth's history. And it happened 125 million years ago. And then obviously there were no bees before that. And then so shortly after, just like 5 million years, which I know sounds like a long time, but in terms of 125 to 120, that's not long. Like they came right away after, because it's a great use of, it's a great symbiotic relationship. It really functions. It's one of the coolest relationships and examples that you can give in biology is bees. Like their relationship with plants, their relationship with each other. Like there's just so much cool stuff going on in bees. They're one of my favorite species. And like all of the eusociality in general is just such a fascinating concept. And thinking about how humans need to adapt and how we could use technology and specifically AI to compensate for ways that we biologically are lacking, in like ways that like humans are too competitive, like too individualistic. Insects do not have that problem. And one thing is though is that insects have nowhere near the intelligence levels of hominins. So that is something, obviously it doesn't need to be a struggle. Intelligence is not a barrier to sociality. It can be helpful, but it also can cause a lot of more like inane conflict. Like we can have petty bullshit going on where we just get pissed off at someone over nothing. Like you accidentally cut someone off and you're just pissed like over something, like lower intelligence, you don't get to have those kinds of internal thoughts as much. And so you don't run into those problems. Bees just simply are not thinking like that. And so I mean, we don't really know how bees think. And that actually is so interesting to me, trying to experiments that try to uncover intelligence and internal perception and experience. I think that's a really fascinating area of study. I don't know, I really get into it. I really fuck with it. But there's the terrestrial angiosperm revolution. I mean, I owe so many things that I love to that event. If that did not happen, the world that I know and love today would not be the way that it is, not even close. And so it's one of my favorite events in all of history, the Angiosperm Terrestrial Revolution, ATR. I love it. Flower power time if you're a fan of Lindsay. But I also have been, the other cool species is leaf cutter ants, which they cut leaves and they live in the trees. They typically can like weave leaves together into like a hive basically in the tree for their colonies. But they cut these leaves. They don't actually eat the leaves. They use the plant matter to feed a fungus, and then they cultivate a fungus. So the ants, and like Hymenoptera has done this many times, where they have developed agriculture and they didn't need
Oh
high
my gosh,
intelligence
that's
to do
so.
it. Unlike hominins, like
Oh my
chimps
gosh,
are
that's
way more
so.
intelligent than ants.
Oh my
But
gosh,
ants
that's
can do
so.
things that chimps could never do.
Oh my gosh, that's so.
Because
Oh my gosh, that's so.
they're a eusocial species. Like they're working in conjunction with each other to where they have emergent behaviors that don't require one intelligent designer. There's emergent behaviors where they don't need a leader. Like they don't need any one bee to know. Like, do you know the little wiggle dance that they do to direct the other bees to good flowers and good food sources? If it's a good one, when that bee comes back, it will do that dance too. So they spread, like word spreads that way. And so they make decisions communally. Like they basically have a democratic society that doesn't need a decider. And so they don't have one. Like they do have a queen, but that's only for reproductive. Like she's the only reproductive member of the colony. But she doesn't make the decisions. She's not like a ruler in that sense. Like they take care of her, she lays the eggs, but and she is not telling them what to do. That's not something that she actually can do. They are making the decisions. In fact, there's times when they'll turn on the queen. They'll like it will just regicide. They're just like they go right for the matriarch and they come for her head. It's like a French Revolution style, like pull out the guillotine event. Sometimes if there can be like stresses and stuff to the colony that will make them react that way. And I just think that it's so fascinating. But it's so cool to me that they don't need that. And so there's also, when I talked about Ophelia wendtii, which is the species of brittle star that has like a visual network that we just do not understand, because distributed. It's a decentralized visual network that's distributed all across its body. It's covered in photoreceptive cells, and they are able to like perceive visual information from this, and we don't really understand what that would be like to look in like 360 degrees and at once. And like they also, their body is not a perfect sphere either. There's like bumps and ridges, so like even the different cells are all pointing at different directions all over this three-dimensional thing. Like how it's able to, and it moves its arms around, and so it's like it's not even able to know like this is where this like eye equivalent sits. It moves, so like I don't know if it's able to control, like combine its sense of proprioception with the visual input to like put together some kind of three-dimensional rendering. I'm so curious. I would love to find out more. I would want to do more in I want to do more into cephalopod vision and well, I'm getting off topic. That's not related to Hymenoptera. But yeah, so like the bees, wasps, and ants is Hymenoptera, and flowers and all flowering plants, they started 125 million years ago in the early Cretaceous, and that was called the Angiosperm Terrestrial Revolution. And yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about for today.